guys doing? How you guys doing tonight? Sometimes when we look at the scriptures, we skip over the verses that get us to the verses we want to get to. Well, there's one of those verses in the book of Acts, chapter 7, verse 20, and it's in the middle of a talk that Stephen is giving, and it's a pretty important talk because it's the only one he ever gives, because after that, he's stoned to death. And so that one talk remains his message to all of us throughout human history. And in verse 20, he says, speaking about Moses, at that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for by his family. When he was put outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. I was caught by this phrase about Moses. When Moses was born, he was no ordinary child. Now, when I thought about that, I started thinking, has there ever really been an ordinary human being born in this world? But even if a person was extraordinary, when they were born, they just looked kind of ordinary. I think Mozart looked like everyone else, and Picasso looked like everyone else, and Beethoven looked like everyone else, and Einstein looked like every other baby, hideous. The reality is that humans are just not that attractive when they're born. I mean, dogs are so attractive when they're born, they're called puppies. Cats, even cats, which I do not enjoy. Even when they're tiny, they're called kitties. But horses are beautiful when they're born. But humans are hideous. I mean, we pretend they're pretty because they're our children. And in fact, I know as a dad, I love my kids. I love my daughter Mariah and MSC, and I love my son Aaron. But, when they were born, they had extremely gigantic heads and tiny bodies, and they were not really productive in any way. That you could roll them, but what else could you do with them? And you could look at them and you could project all their talent and potential, all the capacity that was inside of them. But the truth of the matter is when a human being is born, they look like any other human being. So I love this statement. When Moses was born, he was no ordinary child. See, that statement is not saying that when Moses was born, he was glowing or came out with a staff and said, let my people go. What Stephen is actually saying to us is when you project looking backwards on Moses' life, you can know because of his life that he was not born an ordinary child. But the reality is that there has never been an ordinary human being born in this world. See, I think the reality is that all of us are born with the extraordinary capacity that has been breathed into us by God himself. That every human being is born extraordinary. But the tragedy is that most of us end up living incredibly ordinary lives. That somewhere between our first breath and our last breath, the extraordinary nature of who we are has been lost. And I'm convinced that all of us have this angst inside of us, this gnawing, this pain, that wonders why we can't seem to live the life that we believe we were created to live. Have you ever felt like you had all this talent inside of you, but you just couldn't get it out? All this potential that's trapped inside of you, but it's trapped inside of you? I don't know about you, but the way I felt throughout all my life is as if there was a better, extraordinary, heroic person in there so deep that he can't find his way out. And so the ordinary me just keeps taking the place of the extraordinary me. See, what I'm convinced that Jesus came to do is to unlock the extraordinary nature of every human being. See, when Moses was born, he was no ordinary child. And then right away it says, after 3 months, his parents had to put him out. And then he was put into a basket in a river, and they thought it was safer for him to be in the water with crocodiles than in the safety of their home. And because this man named Pharaoh had sent out this edict and they were going to kill every Hebrew boy. And if life couldn't get worse, Moses floats down the river to the house of the daughter of the man who wants him dead. And then she decides to raise him up as her child. Can you imagine being Moses, being raised up in the shadow of the man who ordered the murder of your people? Knowing that man wanted you dead from your first breath. Now, you think you have family problems. And so Moses grows up with a crisis of identity. Moses grows up not knowing who he is. He's not really a Hebrew because he grows up in the wisdom of the Egyptians. But he's not an Egyptian because the blood of Israel runs through his body. So he doesn't know who he is. And so at 40 years old, trying to make sense of his life, he sees a Hebrew being mistreated by an Egyptian, and so he kills the Egyptian. Moses is so disoriented. His moral compass is so messed up, he actually thinks that God wants him to kill this Egyptian secretly. He is so out of touch with who God wants him to be that he does exactly what God would not want him to do, thinking that would cause his future to finally get in place. Have you ever noticed a person panicking about their life? You ever been so afraid that you would not get the life that you want that you start choosing the life you should never have? You ever been around someone who wants to be in love so bad they keep dating the wrong person, and because they keep dating the wrong person, they can never be ready for the right person? You ever been around the person who just keeps working the wrong job, and because they keep doing the wrong job, they never find the job that they were created to do? See, there's some of you here, you have chosen the wrong life because you're so afraid you can't actually have your real life. And so Moses kills this Egyptian. They find him out, and he runs for his life, which is what every hero does. And so for the next 40 years, he becomes a shepherd living in the wilderness among the people of Midian, and he becomes someone else again. For 40 years, Moses didn't know who he was, and then he ran from who he was and became someone he wasn't supposed to be again. It was when he was 80 years old that he was encountered by a burning bush, when he was encountered by the presence of God. Now, I hope for most of us, we can get this sooner than that. I would love for us to catch it when we're 18 or 28 or at least 38 or 48. But wouldn't it be great to come to a point in your life where you realize there's something extraordinary inside of you that has always been there, but when you are finally encountered by God, he awakens the person you were always created to be. I love the story of Moses because it reminds me that you're never too broken for God to not put the pieces together to make the extraordinary you. You know, and because like so many of you, and I've heard the stories from so many others, I'm one of those people who didn't know who they were. I'm an immigrant from El Salvador. Spanish was my first language. I was born in San Salvador. I never knew my real father. I met my mother when I was 5 years old. I was raised by my grandparents up to that point. By the time I was 11, 12 years old, I was a psychological disaster. I walked into the living room one day and I heard my mom and my stepdad. My stepdad was involved in what we called creative underground economies. You'll figure that out later. He was involved with a large Italian family and that tended to live in New York and Chicago. And in the middle of that world, we were constantly in turmoil. And I heard them say, we need to send Erwin to a psychiatrist. When I heard them say they're going to send me to a psychiatrist, I started screaming, I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy. And I was running around just panicking. And they go, you don't have to go, you don't have to go. Then I realized I looked crazy. So I said, okay, if I'm crazy, I want to know. So I started going to a psychiatrist when I was 12 years old. I ended up in and out of a hospital for 6 months during that time. I have a scar across my stomach where they opened me up in surgery to see if there's anything wrong with my body, but there was nothing wrong with my body. It was my soul that was sick. You see, what I love about Moses' story is that Moses was a broken human being. Moses was a psychological disaster. Moses wrecked his life, and if there was no God, his life would have remained a shipwreck. What I love about Moses' life is that we are now able to hear this truth about him. When Moses was born, he was no ordinary child because all the extraordinary nature of Moses was trapped under the rubble of his failures. But then God tore away all of the rubble and allowed him to rise up again. I want you to know something. You're going to have voices all your life that tell you you're nothing, that you'll never accomplish anything, that you do not matter, that you don't have any value. You're going to have voices in your head that tell you it's too late, that you've gone too far, that you're too messed up, that you're too broken, that you're too wounded. But I want you to know that it's never too late. You've never gone too far. You're never too shattered or broken for God to step into your life and bring the pieces together and create something beautiful with them. I loved hearing Mariah and the band. And it's amazing to me that they're coming out with this new album called Glory and Wonder. Because when Mariah was 14, she was writing songs that went on Grey's Anatomy and other TV shows. And I remember the first song I ever heard her sing, one line said, "Give me a match and I'll burn it all down." She was 14 years old. My wife and I were so nervous going, why are you saying that? I mean, we didn't abuse you. We didn't beat you. We've loved you. Take a match and burn it all down? And she smiled and looks as happy as she always does. She goes, oh, I'm not writing about my pain. I'm writing for the pain of others. And it was in that moment I understood what God had placed inside of that little girl.
Oh, that's good.
She understood that the world was a world filled with pain. It was angry and hurting, bitter, violent. And she was going to place words into the human heart that pull out the despair and give it hope. Take out the hate and bring love. Take away the bitterness and bring forgiveness. I love the fact that now, through glory and wonder, they're bringing hope to the world.
Hallelujah.
Have a great night.